let's start with the Buffalo Bills cleaning house, obviously. You looked at Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White, on top of every other cap casualty that they could possibly come up with as they try to create some cap space in the Pittsburgh Steelers. Man, they have options and plenty of them. Shout out to Mitch Trubisky, who signed with the Buffalo Bills in the middle of all this, a 2-year, $5.25 million deal, I believe. So good for him. What he's going to do there, I don't know. But if you're going to be a backup anywhere behind Josh Allen, isn't a bad one, because the dude just seems to never get hurt. And we all know the dream is to be a backup quarterback in the NFL for a quarterback who's never going to get hurt. Let's talk about the Bills guys who the Steelers could sign, because there are two massive names that I believe make a ton of sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Zero questions asked. And if this is true, the Denver Broncos just released Justin Simmons. That's massive. We're going to get to that in a second, because that just immediately added his name to a long list of guys that we are already going to talk about. Jordan Poyer. So we'll start with safeties, obviously, because the news with the Denver Broncos means, oh my gosh, the Steelers have even more options. Jordan Poyer, 33 years old by the start of the season. Stephen Thompson tweeted out yesterday, you better learn the word yins. He does perfectly fit who the Pittsburgh Steelers are as a defense, and obviously he would be an upgrade over Keanu Neal and DeMonte KZ. But again, the problem is that you are 33 years old, and I think that is where the issues come into play. And if the Steelers are considering adding a safety, which they 100% should, the market right now for the safety position is unreal. The Steelers could not only get Poyer, but many other options that are, I don't want to say well above a guy like DeMonte KZ, but well above a guy like Keanu Neal, and certainly above a guy like DeMonte KZ. They could upgrade the position. They've been looking for an answer there even before Terrell Edmunds left. They were not sold on Terrell Edmunds being the guy long-term. That is why they brought in a guy like KZ. That is why they let Edmunds walk in free agency after just signing him to a 1-year deal. He was never the long-term answer. The Steelers are still searching for a long-term answer. Maybe Jordan Poyer is that answer. This is where things get a little bit tricky. 2 years ago, he's looking at 8 tackles for loss. He's got, 9 interceptions in 2021 and 2022 combined. Massive numbers. You're looking at this guy saying he's still the top of his game. He's one of the best safeties in the NFL. It would be great to have him on your football team. This past season, 0 interceptions, 2 tackles for loss. Again, he's going to be 33 years old by the time the season starts. I view him as more of a, this is really nice. If the safety class wasn't so stacked, he could be a much brighter answer, a much bigger name. I think he's going to get swallowed up a little bit. That's where things come into play again, though, where the Pittsburgh Steelers might get a sneaky signing. They can look at them and say, the market's going to go quick. You're going to get guys like Justin Simmons. You're going to get guys like Jamal Adams, guys like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, all flying off the board for massive deals. Maybe, just maybe, Jordan Poyer's around for a very, very cheap 1-year deal, and the Steelers just look at it as a filler. This is a bridge guy. This is a gap player. The problem there is the NFL draft doesn't really have those rookies that are coming in here that you could work with and say, oh, okay, you're the next guy. DeMonte KZ is also going to be 30 years old. He's not the next guy. You just don't have that guy to bridge with. And so I think there are other names that the Pittsburgh Steelers can approach, and obviously Justin Simmons is one of them. Nick, can we confirm Justin Simmons has been released by the Denver Broncos?
Yep, Adam Schefter tweeted out a couple minutes ago that he has been released by the Denver Broncos as a cap casualty.
That's tough. My dad is a Broncos fan, big Broncos fan. Called him the other day about the Russell Wilson news, and he said you better enjoy him in Pittsburgh. We're not going to talk about that, but he's going to be pretty heartbroken about a Justin Simmons. I think Justin Simmons is a monster. He's an all-pro. My problem there is he's probably still going to be worth a boatload of money, and you're probably not signing 2 safeties for a boatload of money if you are the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're not looking at Minkah Fitzpatrick, who is one of the top paid safeties in the NFL, and then a Justin Simmons and saying, oh, well, that's also a go-to. We're going to pay him $17-18 million a year over 2 years. I mean, at that point, your defense is making too much money, and you don't necessarily have the wiggle room that you want to have, because right now the Pittsburgh Steelers are likely not going to have a quarterback contract. Even if they go out and sign a Russ, even if they trade for a Justin Fields, their quarterback contract, their quarterback situation is still going to be relatively low. And because of that, you want to keep your, let's call it wiggle room, your available cap space as high as possible so that you could jack up the rest of your team, not just one position. And I think Justin Simmons, is a phenomenal player. And I think Justin Simmons makes any team that he goes to instantly better. My problem is that I think there are going to be cheaper options that you likely don't have to break the bank for. And I'm just not 100% sold Simmons there. While we're looking at other options, now I guess we can't look, it's too early. I was going to ask you to look up his market value, but I don't think his market value is going to be available on Spotrac. What is his current contract? What was his contract that they just released him from?
It said that they're going to save around $14.5 million from cutting
That's
him.
a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. That's too much money. You're looking at guys like, I don't know if it's out there, but Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, if his market value's out there, I bet you it's less than $8 million a year. Jamal Adams is a free agent. I got issues with Jamal Adams just because he's been dealing with injuries. I think he's on the decline, but you got to remember the Pittsburgh Steelers loved this guy. And Mike Tomlin loved Jamal Adams coming out of college. Like, obviously they picked 30th, they got TJ Watt, everything worked out for the best in Pittsburgh. But if they, for some reason, were picking top 5, which they haven't done since 1970, so chances are you weren't going to get him anyways. But if you were looking at that and saying Jamal Adams is there, the Steelers are picking, I would have bet anything that they were taking a safety and they were taking Jamal Adams. They loved that guy so much. A couple of years ago when they played the Seahawks, I was sitting right there in the press conference and I could just remember. I could remember Mike Tomlin to this day sitting there just raving about this guy. He didn't even call him by name. He just, he's really impressed by a guy when he says that free safety or that strong safety, whatever he was, and just goes on a big rant, takes up 30 seconds talking about how he loves Jamal Adams and how much of an impact player he is. But again, he's been dealing with injuries. He's, had some issues, I guess, off the field, even on the field a little bit. He's definitely on the decline when it comes to performance. I just don't know if he's that option. That's the market right now. If you're looking at the safety market, it is just stud, 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 stud. You're trying as hard as you can, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, to find stud at the right price. And that is a fine line to walk. And if we're going to round it out, I think CJ Gardner-Johnson is the move. I just think that he's the guy that makes a lot of sense. Do we know his market value?
I'm trying to find that one right now. It isn't up for either Simmons or the other guy you mentioned. I forget who else you mentioned.
Jamal Adams.
Jamal Adams. His isn't up either.
Yeah, I would imagine neither of them. They're pretty recent. CJ Gardner-Johnson, I'm looking at less than $8 million, coming off of an injury. Still played well in 2023 in the 3 or 4 games that he did play. He's 26 years old. You're only going to sign him to a 1-year deal. And that's the thing about the safety market, is there is a pretty significant gap between the top of it and the middle tier of it. There is no, Justin Simmons is signing for $17 million. CJ Gardner-Johnson is signing for $12 million. It's Justin Simmons is signing for $17 million. CJ Gardner-Johnson is signing for $6 million. Like, that's how significant of a gap it is. I think the Steelers should be all in on this guy. I think he makes a ton of sense. We've talked about it before, but we'll talk about it again. He could play the nickel if you need him to play the nickel. He could play both safety positions. He allows Minkah Fitzpatrick to move around. He's only 26 years old. You could still utilize DeMonte KZ or Patrick Peterson if you're going to stay with Patrick Peterson. And I think you have a good 1-2-3 punch that isn't a bottom 1-2-3 punch. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're looking at it and going, oh, well, the Steelers have been looking for that. Yeah, well, they've been looking for that with Minkah Fitzpatrick, Terrell Edmonds, and DeMonte KZ. Minkah Fitzpatrick, Keanu Neal, and DeMonte KZ. It's not the same as if you were saying, oh, the Steelers have CJ Gardner-Johnson, DeMonte KZ, Minkah Fitzpatrick. You're going, oh, okay, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Patrick Peterson, Minkah Fitzpatrick. That's not bad. You are a lot more impressed with that situation as you are what they are currently. And again, I don't think it gets any better than a Justin Simmons. I think that is the biggest name you could possibly sign if you are the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm just not sure that he's going to be cheap enough for them. And at some point, you got to be realistic about where you stand salary cap wise and how much money you're willing to spend at one position when you're already spending mega bucks at other. I mean, Cam's probably going to take a lower cap hit than what he's at, but he's a $22 million cap hit. You're spending a boatload of money at outside linebacker for two guys. One of them's a 10-sack guy. The other one's not a 10-sack guy. I think that's a little bit concerning. Larry Ogunjobi's got a $13 million cap hit. There are just so many names that you're tossing out there where you're going, okay, are we going to also jack up the price by saying this, or should we be a little bit more realistic? And I think that's where you go. I think CJ Gardner-Johnson is an absolute move for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, Justin Simmons is the first top crazy option. And Jordan Poyer, I would say, is we're a week and a half into free agency, 2 weeks into free agency. Nobody signed this guy. He's still probably good enough to start. You could get him for $1 million. Sounds good. That's where you're going. The Bills continue to release guys, and that kind of moves us to the next position of need for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the headlines that have been flying through out there, and that's Tre'Davious White, who I think immediately you looked at and said, man, that's massive. That is a massive release. Makes a ton of sense for the Buffalo Bills, obviously. They're looking at the situation and saying, you can't keep a guy for the mega cap hit that he was going to take on after a torn Achilles. And 22 games in the last 3 years. He's been dealing with injury after injury after injury. He's not the all-pro that he once was. He's 29 years old. He's a corner, so they usually fall off around 31, 32 years old. Concerning. Again, though, if the Pittsburgh Steelers are looking at a guy and they're saying, we're gonna draft somebody, because right now the expectation is the Pittsburgh Steelers will use a draft pick on a cornerback, and probably a first or second round corner, third round latest. And they want that guy to be the starter next to Joey Porter Jr. long term. But if Tre'Davious White is healthy at some point, and a torn Achilles in October, that's definitely concerning. You're looking at that saying, I'm not 100% certain that he's going to be available come July or come August. But if he is, and if the Steelers team doctors feel this guy's ready to go and he should be available out there and the Steelers should pursue him, he's going to be major. He's going to be such a cheap option, crazy cheap option. He's got 18 career interceptions. He's still obviously a starter. And then you have your rookie option to come in here and say, just bridge me. Just let's start, let's start low. Let's do what we did with Joey Porter Jr. Let this guy go off, and then we continue to build a young defense while gapping it with better gap players, better bridge players. Because you look at last year, look at 2 years ago, look at all the times the Steelers tried to bridge a position. Super old, past their prime, nearing retirement, just trying to get as much as they possibly can out of the end of this. You look at a guy like Tre'Davious White, you could probably get 2 good years out of him if he stays healthy, and say, okay, cool. And worst case scenario, he's your 3, then your starter rookie, or your rookie becomes the starter. You got a 1-2-3 punch, and you feel a lot better than that than, the Levi Wallace, Patrick Peterson, Joey Porter Jr. days, or the Levi Wallace, Cam Sutton, James Pierre days. You've taken a pretty significant step forward. That's what the Bills did. The Bills essentially just said, hey, the rest of the NFL, you could have our top guys, and because we've released them right now, and because they're at a certain age, you can sign them for as cheap as you possibly want, because they are not going to have major markets. And the Steelers should look at this and say, a year ago, our options were limited. A year ago, we were in a tough spot. A week and a half ago, they were in a tough spot in corner. There wasn't a lot of corners. You had to go make a trade for a L'Jarius Sneed or Jalen Johnson, and I just don't believe that they were interested in either of those. Tre'Davious White comes off the board, and you're looking at him going, maybe. There are 2 other options that I think the Steelers should pursue at corner that I think make a lot of sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's Adoree Jackson. I think he's my lesser of the 3, but I do think that the Steelers were interested in him coming out of USC, and I think that they would entertain the idea of having a speedy corner who could be back there, has kick and punt return potential, and he's not a playmaker. He 28 years old. He's got 4 interceptions in his career. He's played for bad teams. I get that, but he's never really lasted anywhere that he went. I think he's a question mark. He's the lesser of the 3 options when it comes to these 3 options. A name here, and I'm going to toss it out there. I don't even know if you've heard of this name yet, Nick. Darius Williams, 30 years old, 4 interceptions in 2023 for the Jacksonville Jaguars, 2 forced fumbles. The guy makes so much sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is a stud. He's aggressive. He comes from a good defense. He's somehow just reaching his prime at 30 years old, and he's coming off of 17 starts for the Steelers. I mean, I think it's huge. I think it's ginormous, and a name that he's going to be cheap. He's 30 years old. He's got to be cheap, right? Like, you can't look at a guy that's 30 years old playing corner and say he's signing for $10 million, but I'd probably get him for 6, 7. I'd pay him a Patrick Peterson deal and come in here and say, hey, you're our bridge player, and you make a ton of sense when we're looking at bridge guys. We are going to answer questions as we get later into the show, but obviously I want to answer Michael's because shout out to our boy Michael here. Which new released safety and cornerback would you love the Steelers to sign best box safety prospect in the draft to pair with Minka? I think Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon is probably the name to watch. He's probably the biggest, toughest, he's a guy that just represents physical football, and I think that's their best option. The safety class as a whole stinks. If we're going to be 100% honest, the safety class as a whole absolutely stinks. If we're looking for corners, I'm going to toss a sleeper out there that I've been told the Steelers are certainly interested in and are going to continue monitoring because they hope that he slides to them in maybe the 3rd round if they get lucky enough. And that is Max Melton out of Rutgers. He looks like if Jaylen Warren played corner. Like, you walk up to him and he just, what's up, guys? And I'm like, oh my God, you're massive. He's like 5'10". He's not a ginormous, he's not a very tall human being, but he's stocky. And you could tell he's going to hit. You could tell he's going to be an aggressive corner. And I think he's perfect. I think you move him inside. I think in college he played a little bit of both, but I think you move him inside. You look at him to be a Mike Hilton, a physical guy who could come up with the football. I'm a big Max Melton guy. I think that's a name certainly to watch for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think if he falls to them in the right spot, that would be my go-to if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers. Safety, I guess Jackson, but again, I don't think they draft a safety. I just think the safety class as a whole is just not very good, and I think they're ready to acknowledge it. When we're looking free agent options, Darius Williams. Look at Darius Williams. That dude's going to be a stud. I hope he lands in Pittsburgh. Do you think who was the I can't remember his name. I wish I could remember his name. Who's the dude? I think it was Rashawn Jenkins, Jags corner or safety who just got released. Do you think he comes to Pittsburgh? You think you get a little Jenkins, George Pickens trash talk right in the locker room reunion?
I think Mike Tomlin would probably put their lockers right next to each other just to say, let's get this over with first, kiss and make up or fight and make up, whatever happens. You got to get over it in training camp.
Could you imagine those two going at it in training camp? That would be there would be fights every single day.
We'll get you a referee jersey or something so you can get in between them.
I would never, wouldn't even try. But that would be a move. As soon as he got released, my first thought was, the Steelers need a safety. And man, that would be, you'd have to actually sell tickets for training camp because this is a boxing event now. And, I'm putting my money on George Pickens. At the end of the day, the dude's from Alabama and he played Georgia football. I'm putting my money on George Pickens.